This is Miller Philosopher. One of the aspects that I enjoy most about Tolkien's writing is the nuance that he puts into his characters. There are spectrums to their personalities that one would not think would be there, especially given his reputation for presenting heroes and villains as pretty black and white. And this includes Sauron as well. Everyone is already familiar with Sauron being the ultimate evil of Middle-earth, and that whenever he's mentioned in the stories, that he's basically the new Dark Lord on the block. And while many longtime Tolkien fans know that at one time after the fall of Morgoth, he was, let's just say, undecided early in the Second Age, not much is known as to what motivated him to that crossroads in the first place per se, and why he left that point. Why didn't he just go full Morgoth 2.0 from the get-go after the Valar left? Whereas instead, the Silmarillion seems to imply that it took some time before he fell back into his evil ways. But fall back he did. And this period of time is often overlooked by most people, I think, and understandably so. Tolkien doesn't really explain much as to what went on during this time and what he was up to, other than he was hiding and teaching men of the East before his ultimate fallback into evil, per se. So, to start with, what was Sauron's psychology during this interim period? And should we have any sympathy for him? On the surface, it seems quite simple. His side lost the war, and he was trying to hide from justice. The Silmarillion says as much, after all, when it says that he was implored to return to Valinor for judgment, but instead chose to flee eastward further into Middle-earth. There is also the factor of the amount of power and authority that he had gained under Morgoth as well. As his second, Sauron had command of his headquarters in Angband on two separate occasions during the First Age, during Morgoth's parole in Valinor, and when Morgoth went east to bring the Easterlings into his service during the Beleriand Wars. And Sauron apparently was already renowned for being a master manipulator and a sadist. But I do think there was more to him than that. Sauron's primary focus was order. Everyone knows this, but I would posit that it was his primary motivation from when he was Mehron in the beginning to his final fall at the end of the War of the Ring. As a Maiar of Aule, this makes a lot of sense, since creators are artists and tend to be obsessed with that. And that was a particularly strong trait in Aule and his line, so to speak, of students who were taught under him or who served him, such as Fëanor and Saruman. I think that Morgoth had seduced Sauron through providing him his own vision of how much better Arda would be under his rule instead of Uru's. And for a long while, it certainly seemed so, with Morgoth outsmarting the Valar at every turn. However, the War of Wrath changed all that pretty quick. What is often overlooked about Sauron is that he is afraid of the overwhelming power of Uru being applied against him, or his servants the Valar. While they're inactive, Sauron tended to indulge his innate tendencies. But once the hammer came down, that's when he finally has to face that he's really fucked up at some point and chose the wrong side. That's what the War of Wrath was. The collapse of Morgoth's vision of a perfect order right before Sauron's eyes. It failed, utterly and completely. Yes, he had corrupted Arda to a degree, but there was still no order. And I would also speculate that as the war went on, Sauron saw for himself that his master wasn't about order, as he promised, but just about total destruction of everything not made by him. That essentially his master was quite thoroughly mad. There was no new order or creation to replace it, and I think this disillusioned Sauron. So, that by the time of the early Second Age, Sauron has completely abandoned his former master's agenda, which is where the Silmarillion says that people pretty much thought that Sauron had indeed repented of his evil ways. and that he had abandoned his master's agenda because there was no agenda. However, Sauron himself still had one, because Sauron himself was still all about order, wanting to put order in the world, not destroy it. I think that during this time, early in the Second Age, that Sauron was actually trying to support Uru's plan. The first time, I think, since he went by Mehron. But he was just trying to do it under the radar because, again, he feared the judgment of Uru and the Valar when they are moved to action. And he also knew his prospects of a pardon weren't great. Not that he didn't deserve it. He tried to teach civilization to men who had not been exposed to Western influence, no pun intended, since they would have no record of his past offenses like the elves and the people of Numenor. And he did all this while, I think anyway, hiding from the West, hiding from judgment, trying to perhaps, and this is an assumption on my part, prove himself that he had changed. So then, why did Sauron eventually fall back into his old ways? The Silmarillion says that the bonds that Morgoth had laid upon him were strong, and that he had been nurtured in his evil ways by Morgoth, so much so that it became too strong for him to resist any further, and that slowly over time, he went back to his dark ways and resisting the plans of Uru and the Valar. So, for certain, there is definitely motivation that he perhaps was addicted to the power and authority that he had once wielded. Power corrupts, after all, and it's not like he would have been the first character in Tolkien stories to have fallen to that dangling fruit. I would also add, though, that there may have been two more factors in his downfall. One being the influence of Numenor. If Sauron was trying to make Middle-earth a better place, as it were, then he may have saw the mortals as obstacles to his own interpretation of what that order might look like. And, moreover, as the Silmarillion says, he knows who the ancestors of the rulers of Numenor were, Beren and Luthien. While Sauron may be primarily about order, he also holds grudges for a long, long, long time. Perhaps that was one of the things that he was nurtured in. Either way, it was their ancestors who had been responsible for his first failure and humiliation. To see now the descendants of those who had embarrassed him so, and prospering and as well rivaling him, probably slowly pissed him off to the point where he had to do something about it. Also, though I think Sauron grew disillusioned again, this time it was with Uru's plan for the ordering of the world. Having hidden and traveled in Middle-earth for so long, he would have seen how most of the populations was still pretty much backward, and that the Valar, rather than taking advantage of their defeat of Morgoth to further educate and enlighten the rest of the world, instead chose to retreat back to their palaces in the west. I don't think them sending emissaries to teach civilization would have antagonized him so much as the Númenóreans did, and if that had been the case, maybe Sauron would have chosen differently. Either way, the world was not being ordered as he would like, and where it was by people whom he hated. I see proof of this in how he treats his allies and proxies during the Third Age, while using intimidation and manipulation to gain their allegiance, also taught them power and aspects of civilization as well. It's not like Morgoth, who just said, "Join me or die." In other words, Sauron may have fallen back to evil, but it was not the original evil of Morgoth. He was still smart enough to recognize where his former master had fucked up, and he wasn't about to make that same mistake. And that's what I think what was happening with Sauron during the early part of the Second Age, when he was undecided for a time, and why he eventually chose to go back to evil. But let me know your thoughts below. Otherwise, this is the Miller Philosopher, and you guys have a good day.